Come join me on my second channel, Jaguar Gator 8, where we'll talk all things college football. New video drops every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch the latest video. And now, on with our feature presentation. One of the things that I never quite understand about coaches and how they deal with quarterbacks is when it comes to injuries. If your quarterback is good enough to go, then he should be starting the game. If he's not good enough to go, then he should be inactive. But it never makes any sense to me when you have a starting quarterback who is too hurt to play and is too hurt to start the game under center, and yet he's on the active roster and is the next man up. I don't get why a guy would be too injured to play in the first quarter, but if hypothetically the starter gets hurt, then the guy is good enough to play the rest of the game. It just seems really stupid, and seems like a no-win situation. You risk getting your guy hurt even more, and surely, especially if it's an injury with the arm or the hand, it'd be better to have someone else back there than a guy who wasn't good enough to go or throw a football. And I bring all of this up because in 2001, the Cincinnati Bengals were dumb enough to do this, with a move backfiring in rather spectacular fashion. This is Bengals head coach Dick LeBeau, and in a 2001 game against the New York Jets, he decided that his starting quarterback, Jon Kitna, was too banged up to play. He didn't practice, he had an injury that was impeding his throwing ability, and he didn't get the start. Yet for some reason, he wound up playing in the game, with the result going about as well as you'd expect. This is the story behind one of the stupidest quarterback decisions in the over half-century plus long history of the Cincinnati Bengals. Before I talk about the actual game and Kitna's performance, we need some context to understand how Kitna was doing, and how he got hurt in the first place. After 5 seasons in Seattle, where he spent the 1996 season on the practice squad and spent 1997 to 2000 on the active roster, Kitna became an unrestricted free agent in 2001, with the Seahawks not even so much as talking to him. Once free agency opened up, the Bengals swooped in and signed him, immediately creating a quarterback controversy between him and Akili Smith. The Bengals seriously needed an upgrade at the quarterback position, because Akili Smith was looking like a gigantic bust with each passing day. In his first 2 seasons, the 3rd overall pick had won just 3 games, had thrown 5 touchdown passes, had completed 47% of his passes, and had an abysmal passer rating of 53.8 while getting sacked on roughly 12% of his passing attempts. He was really bad, guys, and unsurprisingly, Kitna was named the starting quarterback. As for how things turned out with Kitna, well, it was a bit of a mixed bag. At the start, to the shock of a lot of people, the Bengals were a really good team. They defeated the New England Patriots, the eventual Super Bowl champion, 23-17 in Week 1, and defeated the Baltimore Ravens, the reigning Super Bowl champion, 21-10 in Week 2. After an atrocious 2000 season, where Bruce Coslett was gone after 3 games and the team went 4-12, all of a sudden, the Bengals were surprising a lot of people, as even though they entered the season tied with the Arizona Cardinals and the Cleveland Browns for the worst odds to win the Super Bowl, they were undefeated and were 2-0. And part of why they were doing well was the play of Jon Kitna. Over those first 2 games, he was completing just under 65% of his passes. He didn't throw an interception, and he had a passer rating of 94, which, if extrapolated over the entire season, would have ranked 7th in the entire NFL in 2000. It seemed like for the first time in a decade, maybe, just maybe, the Bengals were going to be legit. Yeah, that did not happen. Things quickly fell apart after that surprising 2-0 start, and by their Week 14 game against the New York Jets, they were sitting at 4-8, with their season all but over. The Bengals had dropped 8 of their last 10 games, and were riding an embarrassing 5-game losing streak where the offense was absolutely atrocious, scoring a mere 43 points in that stretch, which comes out to an average of 8.6 points per game. They were shut out twice in this 10-game stretch, and failed to score more than 14 points in 8 of those games. And Kitna was starting to prove why the Seahawks were willing to let him go, as in that stretch, he threw 8 touchdowns and 14 interceptions, with a passer rating below 60. Any hope that the Bengals had after their surprisingly good start was completely gone by this point, as it was just another wasted season. But as bad as this season had been, as they got ready for their game against the New York Jets, it was about to get a whole lot worse. Let's be very clear. As bad as Jon Kitna was, and trust me, he was bad over the most recent 2 months of the season, he was by far the best option that the team had. As inept as their offense looked, it was going to look even more inept with anyone else under center. Akili Smith was one of the biggest busts of all time, and in his most recent 14 games, he threw 3 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. And in the 2 games that he won, he went 9 for 29 with 118 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception, and a completion percentage of 31%. In other words, it was not because of him. And the other option that they had was Scott Mitchell, who was with the team in 2000 and completed less than 50% of his passes that year, and had thrown 5 touchdowns and 15 interceptions while completing less than 48% of his passes from 1998 to 2000. Kitna was the best of the worst options, which is saying a lot, because his passer rating of 64.1 at the time was the worst of every starting quarterback in football. But in Week 13, in a 14-10 loss in the AFC Central to Jacksonville, it seemed as though Kitna would no longer be one of those options, and that the Bengals would have to resort to one of their other quarterbacks. During this game, Kitna once again struggled, going 16 for 30 with 147 yards, no touchdowns, and 1 interception. But most importantly, he suffered a pretty nasty injury. On one play late in the third quarter, he got his middle finger on his right hand, which was his throwing hand, caught in the face mask of a Jaguars defender. He was able to play through the injury at the time, as even though it hurt, it was well enough where he could continue. But after the loss, overnight, the finger swelled, and the following day, he was unable to grip a football. As Kitna said on the painful injury, "I either sprained or tore ligaments on the inside of it." At any other position, you tape 2 fingers together, and you keep playing. At quarterback, it's kind of a tough injury to have. And it makes complete sense as to why an injury like that is not ideal for a quarterback. If you're a quarterback, you need to be able to grip the football. And if you can't grip a football with your throwing hand, you're useless. I should note that during this Jags game, in the fourth quarter after the injury happened, Kitna was abysmal, going 3 for 10 with 21 yards passing, and with no pass going longer than 7 yards. So it clearly made an impact. And even though head coach Dick LeBeau said that Kitna would be the team's starter if he was good enough to go, when Kitna continued to miss practice with the injury, LeBeau announced that Smith was going to be the starter. As LeBeau said, "The fact of the matter is, Jon is hurt, Achilles is probably going to play, and I have confidence that he will play well." Kitna was able to practice a bit toward the end of the week, but it was minimal, and the throws were not anywhere close to NFL caliber velocity. It was not very good. Smith was going to be starting because Kitna was not well enough to play. And remember, LeBeau flat out said that if Kitna was going to play, he was going to start. So naturally, you'd figure that because Kitna wasn't starting, that he wasn't good enough to play, right? Well, prepare yourselves for some absolute stupidity, and just another exhibit on why the Bengals at the time truly earned their Bungles nickname. December 16th, 2001. It's Week 14 of the NFL season, and we have a big game on our hands at Giants Stadium between the Cincinnati Bengals and the New York Jets. Even though the Bengals are pretty much out of the playoff hunt, it's an important game for 3 reasons. Number 1, the Jets had to win this one, as a win here by New York would put them a game up on the final playoff spot. Number 2, this was National Shrek Day, with 70,000 Shrek ears being distributed to the fans at the stadium. No, I'm not making that up. And number 3, everyone thought that Achilles Smith's time with the Bengals was over. I'm sorry, it was too obvious. Anyways, with Smith getting the start here, which was his first start of the season, a good outing could maybe inspire some hope that it's not quite time for the Bengals to give up on him just yet. And to start off the game, Smith had one of the best drives of his entire career. After the Jets went 3 and out, Smith embarked on a 12-minute drive that took up practically the entire first quarter and consisted of 20 plays. He went 4 for 4 on the drive, had a few big runs, and looked incredibly sharp. This was what the Bengals expected out of him when they drafted him in the first round back in 1999. However, the good times would not last for Smith, as in the second quarter, with the score still 7-0 in favor of the Bengals, he tried to pick up the first down himself on 3rd and 8. As he got tackled by Victor Green and Damian Robinson, he injured his hamstring, and eventually had to be carted off the field. As Smith said on the injury after the game, "I felt the blitz from the weak side, and all I heard was a pop. That was pretty much it. The way this thing feels right now, I think I'm pretty much done for the year." Obviously, his day was done, and now the Bengals needed to replace him. So naturally, you'd think in this situation that they would replace him with Scott Mitchell, right? If Smith is hurt and Kitna wasn't good enough to go, you put in the healthy quarterback. But that's not what Dick LeBeau decided to do. It makes no sense whatsoever, because again, if Kitna was going to start if he was healthy, then why is he out there now? But with a badly swollen finger and all, making it almost impossible for him to properly grip the football, Kitna was going out there. Now on this channel before, we've talked many times about players stepping up in the face of adversity after suffering an injury. If you want to learn more about one of those many stories, click the card in the upper right corner. This, on the other hand, was not one of them, because Kitna showed why he wasn't good enough to play and had no business being out there, as he proceeded to stink up the joint. Kitna had some bad games before, and again, he was one of the worst quarterbacks in football in 2001, but this might have been his worst game of them all. If it's not, it's definitely up there. In his 6 drives, the Bengals scored just 1 touchdown, with 3 of those drives ending in an interception, and 4 of those drives ending in 3 plays or less. When half your drives are ending with a turnover that you forced, and when 2/3 of your drives result in a 3-and-out or worse, that is saying a lot. By the time the game ended, Kitna was 10 for 17 for just 93 yards, with a lot of those completions being on screens and short dump-offs. When you're averaging 5.4 yards per pass attempt because you're unable to push the ball down the field, yeah, that's not good. He also had no touchdowns and 3 interceptions, making it the first time since he was with the Bengals, and the 3rd time in his career that he finished the game with no touchdowns and at least 3 interceptions. And he finished the game with a passer rating of 34.3, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. Everything about this game was bad, and it's no surprise if the Bengals were unable to hold on to their lead, as even though they led it 14-3 after 3 quarters, the Jets came back by scoring 2 touchdowns in the 4th to win it 15-14, improving to 8-5 and increasing their playoff chances dramatically, while at the same time making the Bengals drop their 6th straight and clinching their 6th straight losing season. I should note that in the 4th quarter, when the Jets were mounting their comeback and when the Bengals needed Kitna to step up the most, that did not happen, as he went 4 for 9 with 2 interceptions, which obviously is not ideal. And after the game, most of the talk in the post-game press conference was simple. Why the heck was Kitna playing this game? If he was banged up with that swollen finger and couldn't grip a football, and if he wasn't starting, then why would he be the next man up once Achilles Smith got injured? Doesn't that seem counterintuitive? Dick LeBeau did not exactly do a good job quieting the criticism and defending his decision, as he said after the game on Kitna's poor performance that it had to do with his physical limitations. As he said, I'm sure his finger was a factor in some of those balls that got away from him at the end there. You look at his finger, it's badly swollen. I'm sorry, what? That's what you had to say about Kitna after the game? That he wasn't good enough to go, and that his swollen finger was a reason why you lost the game? Why was he even playing in that case? LeBeau was one of the greatest defensive coordinators of all time. In that regard, he was an absolute football genius and an absolute legend. But there are some guys that are great coordinators but are in no way whatsoever built to be head coaches. And perhaps no man exemplifies that more than Dick LeBeau, because this is just absolutely baffling. Let me get this straight. Kitna's finger is swollen. He barely practices during the week, and you say that because he's hurt, he's not going to play, and that Achilles Smith is going to be the starter. While all of this is happening, you have a veteran third-string quarterback on your roster who knows the playbook that you would like to think can come in if needed. And then, when Smith gets hurt, even though Kitna is too hurt to play, as evidenced by everything you've said and by everything that happened over the week, you throw him into the game, despite the fact that he can't grip a football, and despite the fact that even when he's healthy, he's the worst starting quarterback in the league. So God only knows how good he'll be under these circumstances. And then, when Kitna has one of the worst games of his career, after the game, you admit that one of the reasons that he didn't play well, and why you lost the game and couldn't do anything in the 4th quarter, was because of the finger. Even though literally every single person could have told you that this was going to be a problem. Nothing about this decision, and I truly mean nothing, made any sense. When you hear that story and realize that LeBeau went 12-33 in his 3 seasons as the team's head coach, winning just under 27% of his games and being a massive failure, nothing about it is too surprising. So what's the key takeaway from this story? If your starting quarterback is good enough to play, then he should be starting. If your starting quarterback is not good enough to play, then he should be inactive and should not be anywhere near the field. But to do this balancing act, where the guy isn't healthy enough to start, but is healthy enough to come into the game, is stupid, and is usually not going to work, as evidenced here. If your starting quarterback isn't good enough to start, then how is he good enough to come into the game 30 or so minutes after the opening kickoff when nothing has changed? Kitna had a very successful NFL career for an undrafted free agent, playing in 141 games and playing all the way until 2011, when he was 39 years old. But for his sake, and for the sake of the Bengals and everyone involved, maybe it would have been better if he only played in 140 games. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.